Today I want to talk to you about why you might not be losing weight despite being in a calorie deficit, which defies the odds, right? We hear about calories all the time if weight loss is purely about being in a calorie deficit. Why for some of you, even though it's a small subset, why for some of you does the weight not move, even though on paper you're in that deficit, you're tracking your calories, or when you run the numbers yourself after a day of eating, you think, surely I should be losing weight here. I'm being consistent. I'm only eating 1,500 calories a day. When I use calorie tracking software, it says that's a deficit. My maintenance calories are 1,800 or 2,000 or 2,400. Why on earth am I not losing weight here? I'm going to run through the 3 or 4 main reasons as to why this might be happening for you right now and what to do about it. Because believe it or not, this does happen. A lot of people don't realize that sometimes, despite being in a deficit, you will not be losing all that much weight. And I want to explain to you why, what to do precisely with that information going forward. Firstly, though, just a quick bit of admin. You'll have heard me shouting from the rooftops, certainly on Instagram mostly, but also the live stream from a couple of days ago about my 10K scholarship giveaway. It's a fantastic chance to join Vegan, Slim and Sustain because I've set up $10,000 US in scholarship money to help new applicants put towards joining the program to make things easier. And without sounding all virtuous and arrogant here, it feels selfishly rather pleasant to be able to give people that, again, there's no easy way to say this without sounding slightly patronizing, but give people perhaps perhaps people that couldn't usually afford that high level of one-on-one support and accountability, the opportunity to do this at a significantly reduced rate with some of that scholarship money. So if you've ever been thinking about joining my program, or you've contacted me about joining my program before, but financially it wasn't quite right for you, now could well be the time. I've linked a PDF down below with all the information on the scholarship giveaway, how to apply for it, how to contact me about it, what I need to know from you if you are interested. So check that out at the link down below. So that's the bit of admin out of the way. Let's talk about the first reason why you're in a calorie deficit but not losing weight. First reason this could be happening to you. Well, number one, you're not actually in the calorie deficit that you think you are. And I see this is actually the most common. This is actually the most common thing I see with people that are convinced they should be losing weight. They're not actually in the deficit they think they are. They've either miscalculated, they've miscounted something. They didn't add the 3 tablespoons of vegan butter or margarine that they add to their Dave's Killer Bread or Ezekiel bread. They take a really healthy, weight loss friendly bread and then they put, you know, a couple of tablespoons worth of vegan butter or margarine on there, not realizing that that might be 150, 200, 250 calories, bang, gone. They're not counting the Starbucks coffee that they have Monday through Friday, adding, you know, the soy cut, almond, vanilla, latte, frappuccino, macchiato. It's usually the lattes, I think, right? I don't know coffee, as you guys know, but it's usually the lattes that are pretty rich, right? Not knowing that might be 160 calories, bang, onto their diet. They're accidentally, you know, I see this often as well with calorie trackers, which I appreciate not many people in my audience are, but back in my days doing this, I made many mistakes with this as well. They mistakenly do something small, like they count dried rice as cooked rice or something like that, and that adds, you know, 2x, 3 times the amount of calories. And they're thinking, oh, I'm only eating 200 calories of rice with, you know, this serving, but really actually the cooked way is like 400 calories, 500 calories. And basically, you know, 1 or 2, frankly, of these slips, or maybe it's just a couple of small things over the course of the day, you could well be eating 100, 200, 300, up to maybe 400. I think 500 would be, it's kind of obvious you're making a mistake then. But 400, you could there is a good chance right now there's someone out there watching this video who is innocently eating 400 more calories than they realize, fairly innocently. Fairly inadvertently. That is entirely possible. I think 500, 600 is kind of obvious. You have to be making enough overt mistakes there to hit those sorts of numbers. But people do this. People do this all the time. Only last week I had a coaching call with somebody when I was doing my free. I did a couple of free coaching calls last week to non-clients, gave a few away for free. And I spoke to someone there that wasn't really counting the smoothie that they were having with their dinner, not realizing, oh, that's an extra. And we worked it out. We were like, yeah, that's an extra 200 calories. And they're like, ah, okay. And so there's a lot of folks right now that are assuming they're in a deficit, but they're not, or it's not as steep as deficit as they realize. So I suppose the very, very obvious action step from this from this, if you're nodding your head thinking, oh, this could be me, is to actually use Chronometer and MyFitnessPal for a little while, just a couple of days. You don't have to do it for the rest of your life. You don't have to be a calorie tracking nerd. That's not what I advise. That's not what I have my clients do. But a brief experiment with it to see where you actually lie, to see where you stand. And I promise you, it will be really illuminating. It'll shock you, either for better or worse, but it will shock you perhaps how many calories you're actually consuming. And you're like, oh, that's actually a lot more than I realized. I would have guessed it was 1,800 or 2,000. It's actually like 2,500 in some cases. And so, yeah, and there's little things in your diet that you maybe assumed were much fewer calories than they are. Again, I had a conversation with no, this was a client this time, about the calorie difference between melon and grapes, because recently they just switched their afternoon snack from being melon to grapes, without being that mindful of the quantity. And I was like, look, we need to be way more mindful of the quantity here. Here's what I want you to do for melon. Here's what I want you to do for grapes. And so, and admittedly, it's my responsibility for making that clear, so it wasn't the client's fault. But again, inadvertently, innocently in their mind, they'd switched, but they were able to eat such a large amount of melon because it's so water rich, for the same calorie amount as quite a much smaller, significantly smaller amount of grapes. That was a lot of words to say what I've just said, but basically, grapes being still a very low calorie food, but as a fruit, much higher in calories than something so water rich. Grapes are water rich as well, like melon. Anyway, you get what I mean. So grapes are slightly more, a good bit more calorific than melon per gram, per pound. And so these are things that over the course of the day, they will add up, and you might not actually be quite in the deficit that you think you are. So spend a couple of days on Chronometer or MyFitnessPal, track your calories there, weigh your food, right? Leave your ego at the door. Don't feel so entitled that you should just be able to eat plants and lose weight without having to worry about portion sizes. That's nonsense. I've covered this a million times. I don't need to go on about it. That's a nonsense. That's a load of BS that you're fed with that stuff, really bluntly speaking. You're going to have to get over yourself, and you're going to have to be willing to weigh things. And I know that you think counting calories leads to a bad relationship with food. I know you feel that it's neurotic to track things, and I agree, but I'm talking about a temporary experiment to teach you and for you to grow and to realize what actually needs to happen next for you to get results. I'm not talking about doing this for the rest of your life. I'm not talking about seeing food as only grams and measurements and seeing it in such a quantitative manner that you never value it qualitatively. I think calorie counting is not good mentally for an extended period of time. I don't think it is. I think it worsens your relationship with food. I've seen that firsthand myself, and I've seen it with folks over the years doing what I do here. That's why my clients don't do it. They don't need to worry about it. But that doesn't mean that I don't consider calories for my clients when I'm making their meals and planning their meals. The difference for my clients is I do all the thinking for them. They don't have to do the guesswork. But if you're not a client of mine, jump on MyFitnessPal, jump on Chronometer, track your calories for 5 days, and I promise you it will surprise you for better or worse. You might be eating less than you realize, but you might also be eating more. And that's why you're not losing weight right now. You're not actually in. I know the title of this video is you're in a calorie deficit but not losing weight, but there's a very good chance that some of you truly believe you're in a calorie deficit right now. You're actually not, or it's certainly not as steep as you would have thought, which is a nice segue into the second reason why you're in a deficit but not losing weight, but might not be losing weight. And I've just touched on it. You're actually not really in enough of a deficit to actually yield any significant results on the scale. Now, I'm always warning against being really aggressive with calorie deficits. I'm always warning against women, especially because they tend to have a lower body weight, having a deficit, a calorie deficit of as much as 500 calories, even though that's mainstream advice on other channels here on YouTube from other teachers and coaches in the plant-based space and beyond, mostly beyond. Even though that is commonplace advice, I strongly disagree with it. I think for women especially, or anyone of a much lighter frame, I think 500 calories is too aggressive. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's needed to get really good results on the scales. And I'm always warning against this. You guys have heard me say a million times, don't have a severe or aggressive calorie deficit. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm not going to talk about that today because I've drilled that one home plenty. What I'm going to talk about today is actually on the opposite side of things. You still need enough of a deficit that all the effort is worth it, that all the effort to be strict and intentional with your diet is worth it, and it is producing results. Now, in an ideal world, it would be enough for people to want to eat healthily. It would be enough for us to want to nourish ourselves from a health and a well-being perspective, not just for that dreaded number on the scale to go down. It should be enough motivation to take care of our health and well-being rather than just for the vanity metric all the time. But that isn't how people work. People get incentivized and motivated and fall in love with this process and have real staying power with this process when they're actually getting results. It's highly addictive. It incentivizes you. And when you actually see your dreams playing out, you really start believing in yourself more and more and more. You really do think, yeah, I can get slim. Yeah, I can get lean. Or maybe I can. And it just extends. Oh, I'll be happy with the first 10 pounds. Then it turns into 20, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, I think I could probably get some abs now. I'd have just been happy, you know, to lose a couple of pounds. Now I think I might be able to get so lean that I actually have some abs popping through, right? And that self-belief and that ambition, frankly, in most people, it comes with results. Some people have it from the very start. But frankly, for most people, they need to see that feedback loop taking place. They need to see that all their efforts are worth something to actually buy into the idea that the transformation, permanent transformation, certainly is actually possible for them. So you need to make sure, bringing this back to our calorie deficit conversation, that your deficit is steep enough to actually yield decent enough results on the scale to whereby it actually feels worth something, right? And I think for most people, this is going to start at 200 or 300 calories. You might be in a calorie deficit right now, not losing weight or not losing significant weight anyway, and just sort of looks like you're hovering, going up and down a bit. And you might actually be losing a little bit of fat, but you're only in a calorie deficit of maybe 100 calories a day. You're technically checking that box of being in a deficit, but it's only 200 calories a day. When really just a couple of small changes in your diet without any major loss in satisfaction or satiation or a feeling of nourishment or energy levels, you could actually maybe knock another 100, 150, 200 calories off and travel down the scale much, much faster. And have that amazing buy-in to this process because you're actually watching yourself transform more efficiently and more quickly. And it clearly is obvious to you that your efforts are worth something and they're actually playing out. So that's the second reason as to why you're in a deficit right now but not losing weight. It's actually not enough of a deficit. So again, this is where my FitnessPal and Chronometer will be illuminating, because you don't just want to be 50 or 100 calories below maintenance, because it's probably not worth the trouble. You may as well just switch off and just eat towards sort of a relaxed maintenance, right? But if you can just dial it in a little bit, it's amazing. You can lose half a pound, a pound and a half extra a week just from shaving a few more calories off your diet. And it doesn't need to be anything aggressive. Like I say, I've warned you again plenty of times against being too aggressive with your calorie deficits. But some of you right now, you might well be in a calorie deficit, but it's not steep enough, or maybe more to the point, it's not consistently steep enough. Sometimes you're in that 200, 300, 400 maybe max calorie deficit range that I talk about for most people being a really good sweet spot between too much and too little. But then the next day you go out to eat, or you overeat, or there's a bit more of this. Or maybe you think, maybe actually you don't realize. Maybe you think, oh, no, I'm actually doing a pretty good job. I've eaten pretty cleanly today. I should be losing weight. But inadvertently, because you're not weighing and measuring and tracking things so meticulously, or you're kind of new to the concept of calorie density, you've actually eaten 200 calories more than the previous day. And your metabolism's like, oh, we don't know what to expect here. You're not feeding us with any continuity in terms of energy, in terms of calories. So that's the second reason. You might well be checking that box of the deficit, but it's not steep enough. So just try and dial it in a little bit. Now, there's then a plethora of conversations to have about how you can do that. Well, how could I trim off 100 calories in my diet, Ryan? What would be the best way to do that? And I can think of so many possible solutions here. It could be that the fat macronutrient, because of its high calorie content, is decreased. Maybe you're having, not entirely, but maybe you're having, not entirely omitted, let's say, but decreased slightly. Maybe you're having lots of nuts and seeds and these healthy fat sources like avocados. Well, these are, absolutely contain essential nutrients for a healthy body. But too much dietary fat is certainly not good for you internally. But in terms of on the scale, it's such a contribution in calories, with 1 gram of fat being worth 9 calories as opposed to protein and carbohydrates, 1 gram only yielding 4. So that's more than double So fat contains more than double the amount of calories than carbohydrates and protein, would you believe? So you might wish to look at your fat intake and go, oh, maybe that could come down just a little bit, and that would shave things slightly off my diet. Another method for doing this is incorporating more raw foods into your diet. So using a few more raw fruits and vegetables, because they have all that water content. You can fill yourself up for slightly fewer calories. Now, this will do nothing alone. If you take your current diet right now and just add more fruits and vegetables to it, you're not going to lose weight any faster, most likely. But through displacement theory, by adding more water-rich raw fruits and veggies to your diet, maybe you can displace some of these slightly, still fantastic for you, but higher calorie density cooked foods, let's say, like whole grains and some of the legumes and whatnot, you know, for more fruits and veggies, and therefore lower the calorie amounts of your meals slightly without actually compromising on the size and the bulk of your meals. So this is a principle, again, commonly referred to as, this is not what volume eating is, but this is taking advantage anyway of the idea of volume eating, by focusing more so on low calorie density foods that have low calories per gram, per pound, let's say. Getting more of those onto your plate and replacing some of the higher calorie density foods, even if they're perfectly healthy, still weight loss friendly foods, you could maybe shave a meal down from a 750 calorie meal to a 700 or a 650 calorie meal without actually compromising the size of the meal. So this is a really clever tactical way to do it. So more raw, fruits and veggies can be really useful for this. What else can be helpful for trimming off calories ever so slightly? I mean, it could just be a portion size thing. Maybe you don't need to attack the fat macronutrients so much. Maybe you don't need to go after adding more, raw food into your diet. Perhaps you can simply do it by keeping the composition and the balance between ingredients in your meals precisely the same. But if you're being honest with yourself, you don't need those last 4 or 5 forkfuls or spoonfuls of a given meal. So you're just going to now, going forward, after you've seen this live stream, make a bit of a conscious effort to just trim them down slightly. And that could be enough to get that scale moving. You can also achieve, a greater, a more effective sort of calorie balance between intake and expenditure for weight loss through exercise, of course. So it could be the case right now that you're averaging 4,000 steps a day. We'll take it up to 6,000 or 7,000. And without having to change a thing in your diet, you will notice that scale going down, I assure you. Most likely you will, I can't promise it, but most likely you will see, for most of you doing this, you will see that scale go down with 2,000 to 3,000 extra steps a day. That's certainly enough to get that scale moving a little bit more so. So anyway, in summary, that's step number 2, or that's, solution number 2, or reason number 2 as to why you're in a deficit but not losing weight. It's just not steep enough a deficit. And just by making a couple of adjustments, you can make sure that you're losing an extra pound, maybe an extra 2 pounds every single week. And you just speed up this process with just a couple of dietary changes. And here's another reason. This is the third and final one I want to cover today. And this is far less likely to be the barrier for you than the previous 2. For 9 out of 10 people, it's an anecdotal number. For 9 out of 10 people watching this live stream, it's most likely that the reasons I've covered so far are the reasons why you're not losing weight despite being in a calorie deficit, or at least thinking you're in a calorie deficit. This is the least common of the 3, but it's worth including here anyway. And I spoke about this recently. You're in a deficit. You are actually in a calorie deficit according to every calorie calculator you can find on Google. But your metabolic rate is so slow that actually your body simply isn't using your calories as efficiently from a fat loss perspective as what the calorie calculator indicates it should be. And you're like, but I'm doing everything right. I'm even tracking my calories right. I'm in a 500. Again, like I said earlier, it's not recommended, but let's say I'm in a 500 calorie deficit and I'm not losing weight. Well, your metabolic rate could be so slow, and there's many reasons as to why metabolic rate might be inefficient in your body right now. And we can come on to those shortly, that you're simply losing very, very little fat, despite on paper it being obvious that you should be, that you ought to be, right? And this is where I can fault calorie calculators and algorithms that tell you how many calories you ought to be eating for weight loss or for a certain goal, for muscle building. Well, they're not personalized. And why would they be, right? They're generalist tools. So this is not me saying never use, these tools online. They are extremely useful. I use them when it comes to planning for my client. But rather, I want to give you an extra layer to your thinking here, which is, I'm an individual. It's very anecdotal. Yes, there is a time-tested, step-by-step proven strategy for weight loss. But I understand that there's going to be an individual and a personal nuance, a uniqueness to me that means that I might break some of the typical rules of conventional weight loss sometimes, because the human body is a complex biological system that you can't always predict. And there are internal mechanisms, such as the metabolism, so therefore by extension metabolic rate, such as hormone function and hormone health, such as the adrenal system, even though people get funny when you talk about it, such as gut bacteria, such as inflammation within the body. These are things that have been proven time and time again to be linked to obesity, both directly and indirectly tying to calorie intake. And so it is absolutely true to say that calories aren't everything. And even though I've argued and made it clear in this video that calories are a fundamental law of weight loss that must be respected, even though people hate thinking about them, they must be respected if you want decent weight loss results. But at the same time, that doesn't mean they're everything. That's not me saying that they're the be-all and end-all and they're the only methodology that you need to prescribe to, or rather subscribe to, or they're the only criteria that matters when it comes to assessing what and how much you should be eating. You should only be thinking about calories. That's not my view. That's not my view. Macronutrients matter and fiber matters. And then beyond food itself, all these internal mechanisms in the body will have a say over how effective your body is at losing weight, at losing body fat, or at building muscle at the other end of the spectrum. Make sense? So there are these individual intricacies, and weight loss can be an anecdotal and a trial and error process. You're talking to me, right? You're talking, not to sound braggadocious, but this is what I do for a living, right? I'm not really a YouTuber. I'm a coach first. I'm pretty bad at this YouTube stuff, frankly, but I'm a coach first and foremost. And after helping 350 now plus people through Vegan Slim and Sustain over the last few years, I can confidently say that there's this weird sort of dichotomy in my mind where on one hand I have such confidence in this Vegan Slim and Sustain system that I've proven with hundreds of clients, and we've had hundreds of incredible testimonials as I'm always publishing through my program over the last couple of years, following this step-by-step battle plan that I've been refining and developing. And it's always changing slightly, but the bulk of it every year remains the same. I know what drives results. I know how to get people to change. I know how to get people to build new habits. I've got a time-tested formula now. I've been doing this long enough. Again, not to blow my own trumpet, but I can confidently say that. But this is the dichotomy. I also have this respect and understanding that this template and this blueprint I've got, it's not that it doesn't work for everyone, but that it might need tweaking for some people far more than it does for others. And I always meet people. It's still a tiny minority of people, but the amount of people I work with means that I've worked with like 50 of these people over the years. I always meet people who defy the rules of conventional weight loss, and we don't always know why. We can put it down to perhaps genetics or metabolism or hormone health, but without plugging them up to a bunch of wires and tracking, body stats over a year, I can't say what it is. I can't attribute their slow weight loss or their commonality, their frequency of plateaus. I can't attribute it to anything in particular. I just have to sort of attribute it to one or several of these invisible forces, let's say, such as metabolic rate, such as hormone health, such as genetics, so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Or going through menopause, or just being a little bit older, so it's a little bit slower and more stubborn for them. And this happens. Women, certainly women over 50 or 60, weight loss is going to be a great deal slower and more tricky for you. And if you can't accept that, and if you can't accept that the conventional laws of weight loss might need to be bent slightly for you in that situation, you're probably not going to get very far, because you're going to think there's something wrong and you're going to be discouraged. And what's wrong is that you as an individual, it's a little bit harder for you. That's what's wrong. But as soon as you accept that, you can be satisfied with a little bit slower progress. Or you can be open to trying sort of slightly more unorthodox strategies. You can understand why you might not be losing weight as much as a 30-year-old whippersnapper, right? Like Ryan Adams. I'll be 30 next year, will you believe it? So anyway, I've gone on and on and on here. I can't remember what my original point was, but weight loss is far more than calories in, calories out. Even though I emphasize that because it is important, it's far more than calories in, calories out. And so this final point on why you might well be in a deficit right now but not losing weight is because you're only in a calorie deficit on paper. And the way your metabolism is functioning right now is not using those calories in the same way that it once may have or that it might be in somebody else. And so all those calorie calculators are online that are telling you that with the amount of calories you're eating right now, you should be losing weight, and you're scratching your head like, why aren't I? Well, there's something internal. There's something internal that is not permitting that from happening. And you need to understand and respect this. So what do you do? This is where it gets really complicated, if it wasn't already. What do you do if you identify, I think that's the thing for me. I'm in a deficit. I'm consistently in a deficit. Sometimes it's even kind of an aggressive, severe deficit, even though I warn against that. But sometimes it's in an aggressive deficit, and I'm still not losing weight. If you're nodding your head thinking, yeah, it might be this metabolic rate thing for me, right? What do I do? This is where it gets tricky, because this subject of metabolic adaptation and adaptive thermogenesis, sometimes it's underplayed by other coaches, by my peers. Sometimes it's overplayed. People talk about this idea of metabolic damage, which is to a degree a pseudoscience and a myth. But metabolic adaptation is not the same as metabolic damage. Metabolic adaptation absolutely exists. It's a can of worms, basically, that you're opening here. But for most people, you need to work on making your metabolic rate more efficient so that you can eat more food and lose more weight, even though this defies convention. I thought weight loss was about eating less food, right? You are going to perhaps need to train your metabolism to eat more food, because if you've been in a calorie deficit for a very, very long period of time, weight can stall. And again, I spoke about this in not the last live stream, but the penultimate one, the one just prior to that. And I spoke about this idea that metabolic rate will slow down in response to you feeding yourself less calories, because the body is really clever. And this is a wonderful survival adaptation that the body has, mechanism that the body kicks into. It knows, oh, hey, Ryan's feeding us, this is my body, Ryan's feeding us a little bit less now. So we're going to hold on to those calories and we're going to start to use them far more efficiently. Once it clocks onto that, your current calorie intake from a weight loss perspective will get stale. It will help you lose body fat at first, but it always needs adjustment. And that's why oftentimes people hit plateaus. Plateaus not relating to inconsistency, but people being consistent, they still hit plateaus. And it's oftentimes because the metabolism is adjusting with this process, as well as they lose weight, they are a lighter entity and therefore need maintenance calories as well. But you put these two things together, and it's really why ultimately people throughout their weight loss journey will occasionally need to shave off more and more calories as they go because of these reasons. So metabolic adaptation is a very real thing, and it's a very normal response that your metabolic rate can actually slow down. Your metabolism can become less efficient with the process of being in a calorie deficit. So if you've done that for a very long period of time, it might be stale. And actually now the solution to it is something called reverse dieting, which I have spoken about a little bit on this channel, but it's now what you now I suggest something that you might even look into, whereby you pyramid up your calorie intake. This is not the scientific term, to restart that metabolism. But ultimately, the way to think about it is to train your metabolism to eat more food. And then later on, you can come back down into a deficit and actually have, this is the theory at least, hopefully better results than previously, because no longer is that deficit stale. It's then new to the body again, and it hasn't anticipated or expected it yet. And eventually it will cotton on again, and it will go, oh, okay, you're doing this thing again. We need to spare the calories, right? Okay, we know we got you. We know you're feeding us a little bit less, so we're going to use them more efficiently. But you might just need a break from that rigorous calorie deficit. You might need to come back up to maintenance calories. And I don't suggest doing this all at once. I suggest using, as I said earlier, this concept of reverse dieting, where you steadily, again, you can Google this stuff, but or watch my other videos on it. You steadily increase your calories and then you come back down again. So that's one way to improve your metabolic rate, is with a process called reverse dieting, and by not being in such long extended calorie deficits. That's really a great way to protect metabolic rate during a weight loss phase. Other things, though, that are really important for the metabolism beyond food are, of course, sleep. Sleep is really, really crucial. Water intake, really, really crucial. Your general health and well-being, and there's a great relationship between metabolism and hormones as well. If you are taking care of yourself, there's a very good chance that you have a decent enough metabolic rate. Exercise can help you speed up your metabolic rate as well. So make sure you're doing some exercise, even if it's just starting out with a little bit of walking. And most importantly with exercise, don't just do bouts of exercise and then stop for 2 weeks. You want consistency. You want that metabolic rate to be consistently a little bit faster, a little bit higher, so that you're getting through more calories and you can eat a little bit more. And this is a great way to improve metabolic rate and therefore make that calorie deficit far more effective again. Maybe it's just got stale for you. Maybe your metabolism has learned, okay, we know what you're doing here, so it's just slow down. And it just needs a jolt. It just needs a little spike in the form of reverse dieting or a little bit more exercise or just better general health and well-being to improve your metabolism. So I think that's it from me. Let's just summarize here. There's a couple of reasons as to why you're in a calorie deficit but might not be losing weight right now. This is a small subset of people, but it does happen. Number one, well, you're not actually in a deficit. You think you are, but you're not, because the Starbucks coffees and the vegan butter and a little bit of this here, a little bit of that, you didn't read the back of the protein bar you eat correctly, and you actually... That's another thing with food labels. It'll have like per 100 grams and then it'll have per serving. Maybe you're using the wrong one, again, mistakenly. And actually, over the course of the day, there's 200 extra calories you're eating without actually realizing it. So the first point here is you've miscounted and you're not actually in a deficit. That's the obvious one. And I do see that really commonly, sadly. Number two, you actually are in a deficit. You're checking that box, but it's not steep enough of a deficit to really see anything noticeable breaking through on the scale. And just by shaving off maybe 100, another 150 calories, you can get things going and actually see those results from week to week, which is really exciting. And number three, you are actually in a deficit. You're doing everything right on paper with this whole calorie lark, but your metabolic rate for one reason or other is just so slow. And you probably just need to give yourself a little bit more calories for a while, come back into that deficit and see how your body responds. Or you accept, on the contrary, that maybe you're in menopause or you're older now, so maybe you do need just a little bit fewer calories than if you were 20 years younger. And you just have to accept that and find ways to tweak your diet without undereating, of course. Find ways to tweak your diet, reduce your calories slightly, and get that scale moving more. So hopefully this helps.